and we'll start letting people in.
Yeah, let's go for it.
Yeah.
8:59.
Yeah.
Morning, everyone.
Morning.
Morning. Great to see you all. Okay, 9 o'clock. Those of you who have been to the previous 2 weeks will know that we're starting bang on 9 and trying to end at bang on 20 past 9, keeping them short and punchy. So Marlin will continue to let people in while I just do this quick introduction. But yeah, welcome to webinar number 3 out of our 4-part series from Impact to Influence. And today, Marlin will be delivering how to tell your sustainability story without greenwashing or greenhushing, which is becoming equally as important these days. So next slide, please, Marlin.
Yeah.
So what to expect? So very quick intros. So my name's Russ Avery. For those of you who don't know me, I'm one of the founders here at Avery Brown. We're a sustainability storytelling and communications agency, and we're delivering this series in collaboration with Hattrick, who are our PR partners, and Marlin is the MD of Hattrick, and we're both certified B Corporation businesses. If this is your first time joining, the webinar will be 20 minutes, as I said, so we're keeping them super short and sharp. So if it feels fast-paced, that's exactly what it's meant to be. So there's no live Q&A. If you have questions, please either drop them in the chat or send an email to hello@averybrown.com and we'll get back to you ASAP. And a very quick run through of webinars 1 and 2. So 2 weeks ago in webinar 1 was all about making your impact reports unignorable. And the 4 parts of that webinar were telling a story, providing context, keeping it credible, and making it easy to read and impossible to ignore. And if you do those 4 things, your next report will stand out above 90% of the ones that we read, and we do read a lot. And then in webinar 2 last week, Marlin talked about how to turn your impact report into a year-round content calendar. And she covered 3 main points about really knowing your audience, which is something that's super, super important, but is often forgotten. And then how to break down your content into buckets called Hero, Hub, and Help content. And then making sure that everyone is singing from the same hymn sheet, which is super important for big organizations that have got different departments, including obviously the marketing department, the sustainability department, separate comms department maybe, and they often aren't speaking to each other. So if you do those 3 things, you can turn your report into a content dream machine. Quick reminder then is, should be one more click, yeah. All 4 webinar recordings will be live on YouTube after the series ends on Tuesday, the 7th of October, which is next week. If you were on webinars 1 and 2, you will have received a link to those first 2 recordings already. It's just that they're unlisted currently, and then they'll be fully public from probably Wednesday the 8th. I'm not going to put myself under too much pressure by saying the afternoon of Tuesday the 7th. But I think that's it from me, right, Marlin? So over to you, and yeah, we're going to dive straight into it.
Excellent. Great. Right. Morning, everyone. Here we go. So today then is about, as Ross has just said, is about telling your sort of credible and compelling communication stories that will build trust and influence. And most importantly then, we'll also avoid greenwashing and greenhushing. And we're going to look at this in three different steps. So the first one is just the context. So understanding the backdrop that businesses are operating in. So we're looking at the credibility gap. The second part then is exploring, okay, so how does greenwashing and greenhushing show up? What does it look like? Because there's lots of different ways. And the final one then is, how do we get to what we're calling sort of our mantra, to a place where we're talking about progress and not sort of expecting perfection all the time, and how that can really help you stand out. So as I said, we're living in a world of real sort of trust deficit, I guess, sort of an era of mis and distrust, as it's saying there. And this has huge implications for business organizations, both in terms of how we operate, but also in terms of how we communicate, which is obviously what this is about. And I think it's fair to say that businesses are really under the microscope currently. So we have, sustainability claims that are under scrutiny with regulators like the CMA, ASA, the EU Green Claims Directive, etc., all sort of cracking down much more on organisations. They are, starting as always with the consumer brands, but they will be looking at other organisations as well. Obviously, then putting business at risk of legal costs and fines, etc. And just to say that we're going to share a guide at the end of this session that goes into this in a lot more detail. So if you want to understand the regulations, some do's and don'ts and best practice, that will be in a guide right at the end. The second part of this then is the fact that as consumers and customers and stakeholders in general, business stakeholders, we are much more skeptical, and we'll come on to exploring that in a bit more detail shortly. And we see sort of these fluffy claims or, undefined claims as real red flags. People are looking for evidence. And also, obviously, we're in the era of social media and online everything in terms of comms, which also means that any backlash is really fast and can be very public. And obviously, as an organization, that means that the fallout can be quite spectacular and it can be really hard to unpick it too. And I'm not sure if you've heard of the Edelman Trust Barometer, but it's an annual report where they research. It's actually a global study, but these figures are UK based. So and they look at trust in much broader sense than we are here. But they're saying that 64% of UK citizens believe that business leaders are purposely misleading them. So, they're setting out to do that, which is quite shocking, really. And this then in combination with this backdrop of, fake news and general skepticism means that we're sort of not sure what to believe, what's true and what isn't. And, it creates a really strange environment to operate in. And with good reason. So I'm just going to show you a couple of examples here because it also comes with huge consequences. So the first example is from Arup, so in the built environment, and this is from last year where staff were targeting by these phishing deepfakes, thinking that it was somebody from their HR department, asking them to transfer 20 million pounds. It's just shocking, isn't it? And they did. So, huge implication for that organization. And again, another very quick reminder that we're talking about AI and technology next week, if you're interested in that. And then, looking at, big impact consequences of misleading information. The biggest one probably is Grenfell. Obviously hugely distressing and an example where sort of exaggerated and unchallenged claims about product credentials led to a huge disaster where 72 people died. So there is reason for this mistrust out there. So those examples obviously weren't necessarily about greenwashing, but they give the context in which we're operating in a broader sense. And it means obviously that also that we are more concerned about how we show up and what we are sharing as an organization. So I'm going to give you some examples of how then greenwashing and greenhushing shows up. And the very first thing I just want to say is that the vast majority of businesses, they aren't greenwashing on purpose. We're not setting out to mislead. The reality is that, sustainability is really complex and technical, as we know, and it's quite easy to trip up. But an organization called Planet Tracker have created what they're calling the Greenwashing Hydra, which is a really useful framework for understanding, all the different ways that it shows people. So the first one, I'm going to talk these through in turn, and then I'm going to give you some practical examples as well, just to bring it to life a bit more. So the first one is green crowding, and this is about safety in numbers. So organizations sort of hiding behind an organization or some kind of label. And one example is an organization called the Alliance to Tackle Plastic Waste, for instance. Huge, ambitious targets, big sort of global plastics companies are part of it, and they've not done anything so far. Just a very nice website. I mean, they have, but it's just sort of tickled around the edges rather than anything significant, but it looks good to be part of that. The next one then is what we're calling green lighting, which is where you spotlight only the good. And I will show you a practical example of this shortly. Next one is green shifting. And in some respects, I think this is one of the more confusing and interesting ones. So this is about sort of shifting the focus of your stakeholders somewhere else. Sort of don't look at me or this organization, look over there. That's where the problem is. And I'll give you an example of that shortly. Green labeling is ill-defined terminology. And again, there's loads of those out there. We're talking things like eco, green. It can even be just using colors to indicate something when, without anything that's not so substantiated, essentially. Green rinsing is when you set a target and report on it, and then by the time you come around to your next report, you have changed what you're looking at because you might not have hit that target, or things have changed a little bit, but it just makes it really difficult for anybody to track the progress that you're making. And I know that a lot of the sort of big businesses in particularly the drinks industry have done this quite a lot, the likes of Coke and Pepsi, for instance. And then finally, we've got greenhushing, which is underreporting, and I'll talk about that in a bit more depth shortly. So looking at some examples then to bring this to life. So the first one is this green labeling thing. And, we will all have seen these, in this case, sort of degradable bags, 100% degradable bags. However, I think this is really confusing because I think a lot of people will assume that means that they are compostable, maybe. They are definitely not. They can't actually break down through domestic waste collection at all, but need to go through like a specialist industrial process. So that's quite misleading. Obviously, I'm sure you've seen the Conscious collection. This is by H&M. They've got in real hot water over this. The collection was banned in a number of different countries, like the Netherlands and France. I think they have discontinued it worldwide now, actually. And the problem here was that they were only focusing, or they're putting a disproportionate amount of focus talking about this collection that was meant to be better environmentally, when actually, the bulk of their collection is fast fashion with a huge environmental footprint and impact. Then the next one then is this concept of green shifting. And I think it's quite confusing, which is why I think it's interesting. So in this case, I'm using Innocent. They ran a big campaign in the States called Let's Save the Planet. It was meant to be sort of a cozy, working with your family type thing, encouraging children to collect and recycle their plastic bottles after use, which obviously is a good thing. The problem is that Innocent is owned by Coca-Cola, and they produce 200,000 plastic bottles every minute. So just asking your consumers to recycle their bottles and saying that you're saving the planet obviously doesn't cut it. So just some fast examples there, but there are more in the guide. Then finally on to greenhushing then. And it's less talked about, but increasingly people are talking about it. And in short, it means the business are staying silent about the progress that they're making. And they're doing so for a number of different reasons. There's fear of being called out. They might, and not feeling sure about what the regulations are, but perhaps also your own data. So not having the confidence that you can tell that story well, and instead of having a go, businesses staying silent. And then obviously, the sort of backdrop that we've been talking about, the fear of backlash and scrutiny in general. And in fact, we have just done a big piece of research with Future Build, the Carbon Literacy Project, and the Anti-Greenwash Charter, looking at organisations in the built environment specifically. And that shows that nearly 40% of businesses have decided to pull back on their comms, and they're sort of saying less than they were before. For those reasons. So you might be thinking, like, why does that matter? Is that not better than sort of overstating what you're doing? Well, it's just as damaging, really, for a number of reasons. One is that, as as consumers and buyers and citizens in general, we're very wary now of this lack of communication. It feels like businesses and organizations are hiding something. And also, obviously, the organization can't be held to account. There's no way of tracking where you're up to and whether what you're saying is true or not. So it feeds into that sort of fake news, mistrust agenda. But also, from sort of a pure business perspective, it's a real missed opportunity, for organizations to build trust and demonstrate, how they're progressing, even though it might not be perfect. So then on to that sort of final piece here then. So how can businesses then get the confidence to break this cycle of silence, or talk with confidence about the progress we're making without veering into greenwashing? And part of that might be actually convincing other people within the organization that to give you permission to share about your progress, because sometimes, our research showed that other people in the organization stops that from happening for fear, out of fear. And there's quite a lot of research demonstrating that being transparent really delivers on the bottom line as well. Not just about compliance, but giving people a commercial advantage. And for instance, there was a report, research and report from McKinsey last year showing that ESG category leaders were sort of outperforming their peers with about 15% in terms of shareholder returns, which is obviously very positive. And the reason, part of the reason why sort of transparency works is because obviously it makes a business more predictable. So if you're open about what's happening within the organization and how you fit into the wider context, you're more predictable. And obviously markets like that, I think we all do. So it all stacks up. So yeah, so that leads us on to our mantra then. So progress over perfection, recognizing that sustainability isn't a quick win, it's a long journey. And the fact that people respect this more than polish. So how do we get this right then? 3 steps. So the first one is about clarity, being clear about what we're tackling, avoiding this generic language and backing everything up. It's about the commitment and journey, as we've said, so sharing your goals and where you're going and allowing people to track that. But also, as this quote on the right says, actually being sure that you're, sort of on the journey and doing something and have achieved something before you start sharing. Because, otherwise, if you just sort of, all you've done is put pen to paper, it's not very impressive. You haven't sort of achieved anything yet. So that's just a good call out. Then the transparency and authenticity bit then. So balancing both wins and challenges. And particularly if you're at the beginning of the journey, your path might not be quite clear. So it's easy to be overconfident about what you can achieve in that time. And that's fine as long as you're open about it. You can't, things will change. I think people accept that as long as you talk about it. And that might include the fact that you're growing as an organization as well. So very quickly then, just some do's and don'ts. So I think we've hammered this point. Don't use generic terms, but that includes being carbon neutral as well. There's a lot of crackdown on that because it sounds great, but doesn't necessarily mean anything. And I think it's very confusing. And then I'm giving sort of best practice here from Tony's Chocolonely, everybody's favorite chocolate, I'm sure. So they had a strategy of offsetting, which is what carbon neutrality relies on. And they're transitioning away from that, being really open about the fact that because they've grown, their emissions have grown as well, but they're tackling that head on by investing internally in their processes rather than offsetting. So quick wrap up. So credibility is the new currency in business. That's how we can really stand out. And it's about being clear and substantiated, and then also bold and transparent, because that's how it can feel being so open. So finally then, so we've got a slightly different offer from last time. So Hattrick, we're about telling stories that stack up and stand out. And we can help you do that by giving you some training, some carbon literacy training. And with this offer, you get 20% off. And if you're in the built environment, you'll be glad to know that the CIBT is paying for up to 70% of our courses at the moment. Over to you, Russ.
Thanks a lot, Marlon. Yeah, and this is just our offer for everyone that we're running throughout the webinar series, which is half price on our sustainability communications audit. So we will we'll review your most used channels and assets. So whether that's your web page, your impact report itself, obviously, and thoroughly check it, not only for risks of greenwashing, greenhushing, etc., but all the things I covered in the first webinar about really how to make your impact report as effective as possible. And then finally, just a reminder of next week. It's the final one in the series. So webinar number 4, next Tuesday, same time, AI, friend or foe, can we harness AI for better sustainability communications? Really looking forward to that one because we get asked about it a lot. We'll do our best to keep it to 20 minutes again. I'm sure that one will have a lot of questions. And actually, I've got one final ask, which is that a lot of you have been on all 3 now, which is amazing, and we really appreciate it. One of the best things you could actually do would be to give us a social media shout out. So we've put a lot of time and effort into these webinars. So if anyone fancies doing a LinkedIn post about them, tagging Avery Brown and Hattrick, then we'd be really grateful. And we hope to see lots of you, same time, same place next week for the final one. And I think that's it.
Yeah, and I think the PDFs are in the chat if you want to download them, both the report from today and the greenwashing guide.
Amazing. And yeah, you'll all get an email with the YouTube link to the video, to the recording, in case you need to check it back. And as I said, they'll all be live right at the end. So thanks a lot, everyone, and have a fantastic Tuesday.
See you next week, hopefully.
Yeah. See you guys. Bye.
Bye.